Hi, this is Swapnil Bhartiya and welcome to TFI Insights. And today we have with us Joe Duffy, founder and CEO of Plumie. Joe, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I want to talk about Plumie, but I also want to talk about, we hear a lot about infrastructure as code. What does that mean? How does it kind of paradigm shift from traditional model?
Yeah, so, we see every organization that's doing anything really serious with the cloud needs an infrastructure as code solution, whether it happens on day one or eventually. The reason is really once you start deploying cloud applications at scale and managing lots of infrastructure, you need repeatability, you need automation. The manual processes that might have worked when you're just exploring and getting up and running no longer work at scale when you have either lots of applications, complex infrastructure architectures, a larger team where you have a lot of people who need to collaborate. Infrastructure as code allows you to use familiar code techniques, code-oriented techniques to version your infrastructure. You can code review changes to it. You can check it into source control. So if you ever need to recover, from a failure, you've got sort of that blueprint of what your infrastructure is. And so, every organization really needs infrastructure as code. There's a broad spectrum of what infrastructure as code tools offer. And infrastructure as code has been around for quite a long time. So we've come through a journey. But what we focus on at Plumie is modern infrastructure as code. And we can talk a little bit more about what that is.
Yeah, exactly. Tell us, why would you call it modern infrastructure as code?
Yeah, so I think infrastructure as code, honestly started around the time DevOps really started over 10 years ago. And was really focused on more virtual machines, back then. And we've come through this transition with the public cloud and containers and serverless. Modern architectures are much more complicated. They involve lots of moving pieces. Oftentimes you're dealing with potentially multiple cloud providers in the mix. You might be dealing with Kubernetes. And so we view modern as this very, fast-moving, fast-paced collection of cloud services that you're trying to piece together into a solution. The other thing about modern that we find is increasingly infrastructure teams wanting to work better with developers so that developers can bring more of the cloud closer to their application architecture, and the infrastructure teams can really empower their teams to move faster. With guardrails in place around security and privacy and things of that nature.
If I'm not wrong, Plumie, like 2 or 3 year old company, what problem that you saw at that point that you decided to form the company? What problem are you trying to solve for the ecosystem?
Yes, my background is developer tools. I was at Microsoft for many years. I ran the languages groups at Microsoft. And what I saw is the opportunity. The cloud is really changing everything about software. Entire business models are being built around the cloud where it's a fundamental differentiator. You think of companies like Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, Spotify. These modern cloud era companies are really innovating in large part because of the cloud capabilities. But what struck us is that most developers still today don't think of the cloud as a first-class part of how they do application development. It's an afterthought, right? They write their code like they always wrote their code, and then the infrastructure team takes it and configures it and runs with it. And what we found is that, these most innovative organizations I just mentioned, they've really figured out a way where their infrastructure and development teams can work together to build great solutions. And we wanted to bring that approach to the world where, the cloud is part of how we do software from day one all the way through, architecture, design, implementation, delivery, and management.
Also, not since Plumie was found, but when you said the evolution of DevOps, now we also talk about DevSecOps. How seriously the ecosystem is looking at security, and how is that also changing the way we are building infrastructure today?
Yeah, I think you can't overstate the importance of security from day one. And I think people have learned this, unfortunately, the hard way, through a lot of mistakes, accidentally putting databases open to the internet and having customer data, stolen. And so I think, most organizations are at the level of maturity now where they understand security has to be built in. It can't be something you add afterwards. It's always difficult though, right? To do security correctly. I remember this from the client server days, way back, a long time ago. You have to slow down to do security right. You have to put in place guardrails and practices that help ensure that you deliver secure software, on day one. And so we have a bunch of tools that help with that around policy as code. And really, we think of it as part of infrastructure as code is security. That is a core competency of an infrastructure as code tool. We're still early days. It's very complicated. The cloud is very fractal. There's so many different attack vectors, there's so many ways you can get it wrong. And infrastructure is complicated, right? And so it's not always clear what the right approach is from a security perspective.
I would want to talk about this current crisis that we are going through, COVID-19, because once we are through with this crisis, it's going to change the way we build infrastructure, the way we look at it, because everybody is now suddenly moving to the cloud. It's become, and security plays a very big role. High availability plays a very big role, because now you do have to worry about business continuity. So from your perspective, how will this change the way we build and manage infrastructure?
Well, I think there's a lot more pressure to go online and to deliver digital content, and entire businesses today, that might be struggling with the bricks and mortar, real world, now have to do business online. And so a lot of people are scrambling to move as much of their business online as possible. And several of our customers are in that category. I think it's accelerating existing projects that might have already been underway. And it's creating new projects and new opportunities for people. And I think, after the dust settles, we'll find that the businesses that fared the best were those who were able to make this transition quickly. Now, quickly and security often are at odds with one another. And so I think that is a risk when people are moving really fast and scrambling, mistakes will get made. And so it's important as people are making those transitions, they pick tools that will help safeguard them against those mistakes.
Right. Have you seen what kind of feedback have you received from your own customers during this crisis? What are the trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think there's a category of customers where, and we're blessed to be in this category, where they're either faring better than before because of this move to online and digital. You think of companies like Zoom. You think of cloud infrastructure for us. Is as important now as it's ever been, if not more. And so there's that category where it's really about acceleration. How do we help them move faster and do more with what they're already doing? There's a set of folks who are really facing transformation, right? Maybe they did have a bricks and mortar business model, and now they're thinking, oh, okay, we need to do some new initiatives to get online. And those customers, we're trying to help as much as we can. We understand they're in a tough spot. We're happy to give pricing discounts and make accommodations. There's the third category where it's, frankly, really unfortunate situation for the business, and we're seeing some businesses not surviving, and things like the small business loans will hopefully help with some of those cases, but they definitely exist, and we do see them. I think the companies with a diversified portfolio of customers, where they're not dependent on, let's say, just the travel industry or just health and well-being industry, certain industries are definitely going to be impacted. So the more diversity in the customer portfolio, the better some of these businesses will fare.
Right. Now let's just talk about Plumie once again, and tell us a bit about what kind of products, services, offerings you have there.
Yeah, so Pulumi is an open source modern infrastructure as code platform. So the entire platform is open source. You can go download it. It's easy to use. The different thing for us, I mentioned modern, but really the first thing you'll notice is we use great programming languages, JavaScript, Python, Go, C#, languages that have been around and have great ecosystems and great tools. We see that there's a lot of folks who are inventing new languages or, scripting or, YAML or other dialects that are, you need to learn. You need to learn a brand new thing that's less powerful than a full language. So by using the entire ecosystem, it's you get great tooling, testing, sharing, reuse. So it's great for developers, kind of a no-brainer choice, but also great for infrastructure teams who want a huge level up in their kind of productivity and ability to connect with their teams. We also have a SaaS service that goes hand in hand with that. We're basically just make it easy for you to operationalize that open source within your team.
And how much of Plumie is open source? Or you have like open core model, or can you talk about that?
Yeah, so we did something a little different, which is we didn't want to hold back anything from the open source. And so the platform is entirely open source. The tools, the languages, the frameworks. Really, the commercial offering is a SaaS product. And so this is really, if you want an organization, if you want a place to store all of your cloud projects, if you want to collaborate as a team, if you want to enforce policy in your organization, again, to this security point earlier, or integrate through identity provider, if you're using Active Directory, for example, that's where you get this easy to use, online service. An analogy I sometimes draw is, sort of like Git is entirely open source, and then GitHub, if you want to use Git within your team. It's a similar dynamic between our open source and commercial offering.
And can you talk about what kind of open source projects you are involved with or contributing to that, Plumie relies on?
Yeah, so we actually integrate with existing infrastructure as code tools. So for example, Terraform is a good example. If you're coming from Terraform, we've got a way to integrate with any Terraform provider, which is great because, if you prefer JavaScript or Python to HCL, you still get access to all of those providers with Pulumi. We try to be good open source, ecosystem players. We definitely contribute upstream. We've contributed upstream to Kubernetes, for example. We've got a few committers that have worked with Pulumi. But Pulumi itself is open source, and we have a great community growing around that as well.
Pulumi 2.0 was released a few weeks ago, if I'm not wrong. Talk about some of the highlights, some of the features of this release.
Yeah, so when we started Pulumi, Pulumi 1.0, let's say, it was really focused on the core task of provisioning infrastructure. And that was great. It was super helpful to bring, infrastructure as code to provisioning with great languages. But as we work with more enterprise customers, especially, they kind of told us that, hey, there are these adjacent areas that we need help with. And so we sort of went beyond provisioning to tackle things like, how do I test my infrastructure? How do I enforce policies, to the security point that we were talking about earlier? How do I build, share, and reuse cloud architectures within my team? And then finally, how do we do continuous delivery of our applications and infrastructure? What are the workflows that would allow us to continuously deliver infrastructure changes with built-in policies and security, much like we've already done with applications? Continuous delivery for applications is very common. For infrastructure, it's still very early days. And so we worked to basically branch out into these adjacencies. We call them superpowers, and really help teams not only do all those things, but do them at scale in very complex environments.
Right. And what is the release cadence of Plumie?
Yeah, so we're, for the open source project, we are shipping continuously. So we've got a new minor release at least every week. We do all of our planning out in the open. So, a lot of discussion on GitHub, a lot of discussion in our community Slack. Our SaaS, we're shipping continuously. We actually built our, website using Pulumi itself. So we're actually practicing some of those same continuous delivery practices we mentioned. We actually use policies code. We test our code. So we're actually living the Pulumi dream and how we actually deliver the service. And so it's continuous. We have production releases, many, many times a week.
Excellent. What kind of community is around Pulumi's open source project too?
Yes, it's a really great community. We're community first in everything we do. That's partially, the open source nature of the company, but we really believe that sharing and reusing best practices and helping each other, in the cloud is really kind of what we're all about. That's fundamental to our DNA. So we actually see, domain experts in AWS, Azure, GCP, Kubernetes, really, collaborating and sharing with each other. And so if you join our community Slack, we've got a, general channel, and we've got lots of people talking about just general things around microservices and serverless. But then if you want to hop on over into the AWS channel, there's deep conversations around how to adopt AWS services. And then by language too, if you're a Python developer, we've got a Python, channel where you can join in and meet other Python infrastructure enthusiasts. And so It's definitely growing really fast. But the key thing is the community is helping the community. And so we're seeing this nice worldwide sort of bond forming between infrastructure experts.
So Joe, thank you so much for taking time out and sitting down here to talk about Pulumi. I look forward to talk to you again at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Swapnil. I really appreciate the time.